Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith. And in today's workshop, we're going to build an AI-powered chart generator using the Mermaid JS library and the OpenAI Assistant API. So Mermaid JS is a charting and diagram library that uses a syntax similar to Markdown. It's plain text, but you can generate Gantt charts and flow charts, mind maps, user stories, all different types of charts, and everything is just plain text with a couple lines about this chart type, and then here's some data. It's very similar to a CSV format. So we're going to use an app that I started last week. If you saw last week's workshop, we made a starter template for integrating with the OpenAI assistant. So to speed things up, today we're just going to copy that template. You can check out the link in the description and get your own copy. And this will give you everything that you need to integrate with the OpenAI assistant. All you have to do is copy it and plug in your API key and the assistant ID. So today we're going to use that to speed things up and skip to the fun part of generating charts using AI. All right, let's check it out. All right, here's the library that we're going to use today. It's Mermaid JS, a diagram and charting tool, and it's Markdown inspired, which means it's very similar to Markdown with no coding involved. It's just plain text where you've got a line saying what type of chart you want and then a few rows for the data, and you don't have to write any code to actually generate the chart. So we'll check out a couple examples here. Like a flow chart, you can see there's two arrows coming off of A here, and it's obvious just looking at it. You can edit a few parts of this and re-render the chart. You got a sequence diagram here, and it's a little more complex, but it's still easy to tell at a glance. If you wanted to edit like one little piece, you can tell, where you would make that change. So it is really easy to like understand and edit from that perspective, but your data is probably not in this format. If you're trying to generate a Gantt chart, it looks pretty simple as far as how you'd set it up, but if your data is in SQL or coming from an API, it's not going to return perfectly in this format. So the trick is that every one of these charts needs a different format, and every data structure that you're starting with, your table, is starting in a different format as well. So you have to write a function specific to every combo of, I'm starting with this table of data, and I want to go to this chart type. Now, that would be another library on its own. You could, try to write some complex function that handles every chart type. But what we're going to do today is use AI to write that function that goes in between your data and the custom widget that is going to load up one of these charts. So first, what we'll do is just get Mermaid JS working in a custom widget. And it'll be hard-coded with just one example here, just so it'll render. Once we get that working, then I want to make it dynamic to where we can pass in data and change something about this input here and see it actually update in the chart. And then once that's working, we're going to tie in AI so that we can pass in our own data, the raw data from row level, from like a API or database query, and have it map over the data and turn it into the right format for any one of these charts. So it will take a different function for each one, but we'll say, here's a sample of the data, and this time I want this type of chart, and then it'll give us a function that outputs that. So first, let's start out. We're going to use a template that I started last week. This gives you everything you need to connect to the OpenAI Assistant API. It's got the APIs and the UI and a little bit of JavaScript to help handle it. So we're going to copy this and build on top of it. I'm not going to go into the AI API too much. We are going to use it, but since I've got this video from it last week and the template's already there to copy, I'm just not going to spend a lot of time going through the app itself. So click try it out, and then you can fork the app. I've actually got to fork it differently because it's my app and it's not showing that option. So I'm going to fork this to another workspace here. And you'll see this API failing on page load because there's no API key yet. So I'm going to go over to the OpenAI docs here, and we'll create a new API key. All right, and we'll copy this key, and then back to the app. Go to the queries and just select any one of the APIs in this app, and go to edit data source. You can see they're all under the same AI assistant data source here. So edit that data source and just put that API key here under the authentication, and then it's for the value for the authorization key. So I'm going to save that. And if we head back to the editor here, we should be able to get a 200 response now on the create thread. So this API it's the first step in creating a chat. If you want to actually talk to the AI assistant, the first thing is that you just run the create thread, you get back an ID, and then that ID gets used in all the other APIs. I'm not going to go too much more into this app. Just check out the video from last week. So now that this is reconnected, I want to build a chart right here so that we can ask it a question, send it our data, and get a chart back. So let's add a new custom widget. And first, I just want to get a basic mermaid chart rendering in here. And it's just going to be hard-coded. So I'm copying the script tag and the CDN link from JS Deliver. If you just go to jsdeliver.com and search mermaid, and then copy the HTML because you want to get the script tag with it. So I'm copying that. And back to the app here, go to edit source for the custom widget. And I'm going to clear out all the JS and the CSS. And then we'll import that script. And instead of this ID equals root from the React example, we want class equals mermaid. So the mermaid library looks for any div that has the class of mermaid, and it'll take whatever text is inside there and try to turn it into a chart if it's a valid chart syntax. So now if we grab one of these and put that inside the div, you can see it just renders that chart for us. You can add styling to change the colors and whatnot, but it does so much of it for you automatically that all you have to really do is give it the raw data in the right structure, and then it'll generate that chart. So let's check out a couple more and put that in here. And you can see the colors here are different than the other one, but that's just some extra CSS that they've added to this particular website. But the logic to convert this text into a chart, that's there in the library. Okay, so that's all working. The next thing is to get this to where we can change the data. So I want to pass data in using the Appsmith model. And to do that, we want to use the JavaScript side here and write a function so that it will update this div. So it's starting out with this data, and I want to like tweak a word or something and or a number and see it update. Let me grab the pie chart example because I think that'll be easier to follow as we do this. And then I'm just going to change a couple of these numbers, and we should see the pie chart update. So let's head over to the JavaScript side, and we're going to add an Appsmith on ready function. This will run once when the app first loads, and it takes a function as the parameter. So the thing inside the Appsmith on ready is another function, and it will run this once when the page loads. So what we'll do is first target that div. And then I'm going to define the string that I want to use to update it. So let me copy this again. And we'll say code equals. And then I'm just going to tweak a couple of these numbers so that we can actually update it, and we should see a difference. So right now it's still using these numbers. So far I haven't told it to do anything yet with this code here. So now I want to take this code and set it to the inside of that div. Okay, so it changed it. It did set the inside of that div to this string, but it also broke Mermaid. So like Mermaid's not trying to render that div anymore. So this part took me a little while to figure out. When you change what's in there, Mermaid is not going to re-render that div because it has added this attribute to it. I wonder if I can show this in the inspector. I didn't try this before, but I found this in the GitHub actually, like other people having a similar issue. So if I look at this Mermaid div, there it is. Yeah, data processed is true. So there's this attribute called data processed, and when Mermaid first loads and it looks for all those divs with a class of Mermaid, it takes the text that's inside there, renders it into a chart, and then it adds this data processed equals true. And once that's there, it will not try to run that div again. So once you change the code of the div, you actually have to remove that attribute and then reinitialize Mermaid. So we've set the code. Now div remove attribute data processed. And once that attribute has been removed and the text inside the div is updated, then you can reinitialize Mermaid. And that initialized it and it's working again. But if you have more than one Mermaid chart on your page and you don't want them all to reinitialize, then you can give it the name of or actually the element itself. That is the second parameter though. The first parameter is undefined, or I'm using undefined because it's the theme and I don't want to use the theme right now. So just in case you're using more than one Mermaid chart on your in your app or in the same custom widget, you probably want to reinitialize using undefined or an actual theme if you've got one to pass in, and then the name or the reference to that element. So that is updating when I type here, but that's because it's re-rendering all of this code because I'm changing the code that's in the code editor. What I want to do is pass in the data from Appsmith. So I'm going to copy this chunk right here. And let's go back to the custom widget. And I want to pass data in, so that's the model here. And I'll just add an object with a property of code, and then that string. So this is the code that I want to pass into the chart. And now if I reference that right here from the model, all right. So the code actually feeding the custom widget now, it's coming from outside of the custom widget, which gives us the option to pass data in and do a API query or a database query or whatever, get some data back, run a function on it, and then see this chart update in real time. So what happens when we change the data now outside of the custom widget? Nothing. But if I refresh the page, now the chart did change, but it's not changing in real time as I type, which means if we try to pass data in right here from an API or database, we can keep running that query and get new results, and nothing's going to change until we refresh the whole page. So to fix that, go back to the custom widget editor here. We have an onReady function, but we don't have an onModelChange. So I'm going to copy all this, and we'll make this one onModelChange. So when the model changes, we want to do basically the same thing. I'm going to take this selector here for the div that can be outside the function, just to get rid of some of this duplication. And so this line doesn't need inside that function anymore. The rest of it, I think I want to keep inside the function, because even though it looks kind of redundant, the thing is you don't want to define what that model code is up here outside the function, because that is only going to get evaluated once when the custom widget first loads and the page opens. So if I go moving this line up as well, both of them will be looking at the exact same model, and it'll never change, right? Like just that once on page load. So inside the on model change, you want to have a new separate check of what's inside the model. So let's go back and see if it updates now when we type in the model. Cool. Okay. Both cases now, the initial default model and then updating the model, both of those should change the chart. So we're just about ready to tie in the AI now. If we could put a value right here dynamically that was in the right format, it should automatically like render a whole new chart type with new numbers and everything. But I need some data. So I'm going to add a new API. And I'm just using some mock data here. I'm going to use Macoon's API Playground. And this has a bunch of different mock endpoints you can use. I'll just get the users one. Okay, so we got some mock data here. And I want to map over this and be able to get a chart based on this data, like is active. You know, we could do a pie chart of true or false there. So back to the UI here. We're going to send a prompt to this AI assistant, and I want to ask it for a specific chart type and then give it a sample of that data. I think I want to display this data too. I'm going to add a table up here. Just so we can look at the data and the columns as we're asking the question that we want to chart. So this will display our get mock data. Data. There it is. Okay. All right, I think we are just about ready. So now I need an AI assistant that knows this task that we like have actually prompted for this. So if you go over to the assistants section here in the dashboard, create new API or a new assistant, and then you just put in some instructions. I've got like I started with a basic description saying that you're helping me write the JavaScript to create a mermaid chart. And at first it was fairly accurate, but I had to give it an example and tell it to put everything inside of an export default so that I could put that into the Appsmith JS object. And then I also noticed that like Sankey diagrams, they're still in beta, and this XY chart is in beta, and it just wasn't doing a good job of generating the function with those two types. So I went to the docs and just copied those sections and copy and pasted the examples into the instructions. So I can put a link to this, and I'll share like the actual prompt if anybody wants to use it. But that's all I'm using on this assistant. I'm not even using the files. If you want, you could try to export the entire docs or the GitHub repo and give it more up-to-date info about this library, but it knows enough just from what's online, and there were a couple that it was getting wrong, so I added those extra examples. So you got your API key and the data sources connected, and then the other half is you got to create an assistant in OpenAI, put that prompt in there, and then copy this ID here for this specific assistant, and then back to the app here. In the run thread API, in the body, that's where the ID goes. So when you create a thread, there's no ID needed. You're getting back an ID. And then this ID gets used to add a message to a thread. Here it is. And then the message is from the input here. So when we go to send a message to this assistant, I want to give it a sample of the data, not just the input text. So I'm going to add right here. We'll give it a sample of that get mock data.data. And I don't want to do all the rows, so I'll do a slice from the first to the third row. Okay, but this is expecting a string, and you can see that's got a bunch of objects here. So we can take this chunk of it and JSON.stringify. And now it's all one string, but it's going to be directly connected to the input text here. So what I'm going to do is turn all this into a template literal. Let's put backticks around all this. Make this one a variable. And this one. And then just have a couple new lines here in the middle. Okay, so that'll separate the user's prompt from the 3 rows of sample data that we're sending. I think we're just about ready to test this. So let's go back to the UI. I'm going to refresh the page just to start a new thread. And so this template that we're building on, I can get rid of this modal now because we do have an API. But this template starts a new thread every time the app first loads. And if I go to the JS object here, I'm going to get rid of this thing that was opening the modal on page load because we don't need that. So we've got a column called isActive. Let's see if we can get a pie chart of isActive. So this is sending a sample of our data now with that request, and it should give us back some code here. Copy this, and I'm going to paste it into a new JS object. We'll call it chart generator. Paste this in here. There we go. So it's got a pie chart and then 2 numbers. So we can display that right here in place of that hard-coded version. So we'll reference that chart generator function. And now we have a pie chart coming from the API data. So what if the incoming data changes? Let's set that API up so that we can change the number of records that we're getting back. I'm going to add a number slider. And we'll use this for the number of records. Let's see, we'll start out with 20 and go with a step size of 5. And then when we change this, I'll use it to recall the API. So on change, get mock data. And then right here, we'll use that parameter. Limit equals, and then reference the number slider value. So it's set at 85 right now. Okay. And I just want to move the chart up here so we can see it. All right. Cool. Yeah, there it is. It's staying around 50% with this API. It's random, but it's about a 50-50 split. So you can see that as the API runs and the incoming data changes, the chart is updating. It's using that function and mapping over the data again and giving us a new version of that chart. So now let's try one a little more complex. Um, this has, let's see, this data. I'm going to try a different table from Makun. Let's look at notifications, posts, to do. I think that's got a status priority. That would work. Yeah, this will give us a little more to chart because it's good to have columns that repeat, whether it's true, false, or like a priority. I think this is 0 to 10. So let's try to-dos. Okay. And this time with our to-dos, let's look at a Sankey chart showing the completed status and then breaking that down into priority. This is one of the ones that didn't work for me at first until I gave it some extra instructions telling it about the format needed for a Sankey. So let's see if it's working now. I'm just going to overwrite this whole chart generator function and run it again. Wow, there it is. Yeah. So it starts out with a total of ones that are false and then breaks down into each priority. And if I run it again, as the API changes, or your database query, whatever you're connected to, then you can see this chart update in real time. So this is pretty cool. I was impressed when I first got it to work, but then like several of the chart types I tried weren't working. And it wasn't a problem with the AI itself or the prompt. It was just, it didn't have the most updated data. So taking those types of charts that didn't work and just adding that extra example here, that was all it needed. And then after that, it's been pretty accurate. So this same approach works with tons of different libraries and different use cases where you want the AI to help you generate a function. Just give it an example and a sample like input and output, and then it'll write the code for you so that you can put that in Appsmith. And chances are you're not going to sit here and ask questions and keep doing new chart types. This is more of like a developer tool that you would use one time to get the code, and then you can go put that in another app. And again, as your data changes, you'll still be able to see it dynamically update. But rather than one chart that keeps changing types, you'll probably want to use this to get the function and then make a specific custom widget for that one chart type and that one function. And then if you need to come back and use this tool again to get the next function and the next one, that's fine. But yeah, I see it being used more of a dev tool to help you build the next app and just get that code. And then that function will always work as your data changes. So I hope this has been helpful. This was a lot of fun. If you have any questions on this or ideas for future workshops, feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week.